Fermilab, Forging the Keys to Hell. Written, produced, and narrated by the author, Randy Benjamin. Prologue. The first sign that something wasn't quite right came a few days before Christmas, sometime around the 22nd if memory serves me. Most of the scientists and their families had already left for the holidays. Winter came early to Illinois. Frost whitened the landscape long before the sounds of trick-or-treat echoed throughout the countryside. In a cluster of brightly colored buildings, more reminiscent of Disneyland than that of the world's Center for Particle Physics, the most astonishing discovery was about to take place. Questions that had eluded theologians and theoreticians alike were about to be answered. This discovery might just as easily have been made at Caltech, or Stanford, or any of the prestigious European universities. The Japanese have been at the forefront for years. The Russians, too, were searching for the Rosetta Stone, the skeleton key that would unlock the secrets to creation. Even so, it seemed predestined that this discovery would take place in the United States. After all, the world's most powerful proton accelerator, Fermilab's superconducting synchrotron, was located there. Nicknamed the Tevatron, keys that would unlock the secrets of the universe were patiently being forged deep within its womb. Prominent scientists in the fields of quantum mechanics and cosmology had been coaxed from their respective universities to work solely on this project. They came from all over. Stephen Tycho from the CERN Laboratory for Particle Physics near Geneva. Maxwell Brunner from the DESI Institute in Hamburg. William Scott from the Brain Trust at Stanford's Linear Accelerator in Palo Alto. Even Professor Yamamoto, now in his 80s, the founder of Japan's famed fifth-generation AI lab, had seen fit to join this hallowed assemblage. After years of research and over $1 billion in funding, the triumph these men so diligently sought was finally at hand. Why was Tim Collins associated with such intellectual giants? Probably because his article, In Search of the Elusive Monopole, had won last year's coveted Fillinger Award. Nova's turning it into a PBS documentary didn't hurt either. In any event, as the science editor for Future Technology magazine, it was going to be his job to chronicle the discoveries taking place at Fermilab as they unfolded. He would bear witness to nature's hidden wonders, observing the obliteration of protons as they smashed into their component particles, quarks, gluons, tops, bottoms, color, charm, spin, and all the other yet-to-be-discovered particles, born of massive collisions at relativistic speeds, swimming in fields of synchrotron radiation. He would record the merging of new technologies, the marriage of matter and antimatter, the quest that would lead to the confirmation of the theory of supersymmetry and the key to creation. Like a scribe in the days of the ancient pharaohs, his task would be to chronicle events whose sheer prominence would carry them forward into the new millennium. At least, that was his intention. If he'd have had any idea of what really lay ahead of him, he would have run as far and as fast as his spindly legs could have carried him, never looking back, never stopping to catch his breath, never once turning his head to chance a glimpse of whatever it was that was making those god-awful moaning sounds behind him. And when he could run no more, he'd walk. When he could walk no farther, he'd crawl. If nothing else, he'd just fall forward. Anything that would put one more inch between him and the images that would dwell in his mind and haunt his memory forever. Truly, the light of discovery was burning brightly at Fermilab, but some things are better left in darkness. Some doors should never be opened. They should be bolted shut forever. That giant accelerator not only unlocked the secrets of matter and energy, it punched a hole through the very fabric of space and time. What emerged from that hole was not of this world, maybe not even of this universe. The trouble with having a skeleton key is that you can never be sure of what's standing behind the door it unlocks. And as that door creeps open, you may just find that no matter how hard you push, something on the other side pushes back, just a little bit harder, and there's nothing you can do to close it again. Here are the events as they unfolded, as Tim Collins recorded them, before the demons were unleashed and the darkness fell. 1 Corinthians 1:19. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Forward. General J.T. Russell, retired, sinks deep into the cushion of his 20-year-old recliner, a reading lamp low over his right shoulder, the soft glow of its CFL bulb illuminating the stack of papers lying in his lap. On a marble end table sits a crystal snifter of Courvoisier XO cognac. The remote to a 60-inch plasma television lies close by. With the touch of a button, he can choose between hundreds of high-definition television channels or watch the latest in a superb collection of DVDs. Other evenings might find him basking in the rich sounds of classical music, meticulously reproduced by his Bose stereo system. This is his hideaway, and he revels in his solitude. But there will be no entertainment tonight. Tonight, he's brought work home with him.
It feels good to be needed again,
he says to himself as he thumbs through the stack of papers lying before him. Like the rest of the world, he's been watching the events unfolding at Fermilab with great interest. Now, he'll be privy to what's really going on. Earlier today, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, convinced him to come out of retirement to work on a project that could change the course of human history. When asked, he jumped at the chance. 3 hours ago, General Russell was given one of 4 copies of Tim Collins' Daily Ledger. Collins had been hired to chronicle the new technologies being developed at Fermilab. 4 days ago, he and his ledger had turned up missing. The document, pages wet and stuck together, had been found at an undisclosed location. A restoration team worked around the clock to get it into a readable condition. General Russell's job was to solve the mystery of why Collins had disappeared and where he and the others with him had gone. The brass at DARPA believed the answers to both questions could be found hidden within its pages. He skimmed the first few pages, hoping to get past the boring stuff about how Collins had gotten his position at Fermilab, then decided to start near the end of the document, figuring that the most current information would be found there. Time was of the essence. As he read, it was obvious that these last pages were written under a lot of stress. At times, Collins' thoughts seemed to wander, whole paragraphs not making any sense. It was as if he had intended to fill in the missing information later, when he had more time or was in a safer place. What he read was fascinating, though. Portals, aliens, monsters. No wonder the public wasn't hearing the whole truth. He wasn't sure if he was reading a classified report or if someone had slipped in a draft of a new Stephen King novel. Parts of it didn't make any sense at all. Collins talked about things he didn't understand. He was curious as to why the story ended so abruptly, in mid-sentence. And who were these people Collins was talking about? What follows is what he read on those last few pages. Everyone turned, trying to figure out where the hissing noise was coming from. Then they saw it. 50 or 60 feet ahead of them, the tunnel seemed to get blurry. It was as if they were looking through air rising off a hot section of highway. The image shimmered as they watched. Within a few seconds, a portal appeared and the hissing sound stopped. Russell sat back thinking to himself.
What does he mean? A portal?
He continued reading. It was a huge portal blocking the tunnel entirely except for a small space next to the bottom of the inside wall. A few more feet and it would have cut into the beam tube itself. All hell would have broken loose had that happened. Depina's curiosity got the better of him, and he walked over to investigate the phenomenon. As he approached, he could see the desert scenery that some of the others had talked about. It was like looking through a giant window, only there wasn't any glass. He felt like he could jump right into it and walk around. It was tempting. Then he remembered the things under the sand and the bent crowbar.
Maybe later.
Again, the general was lost as to the meaning of what he'd just read.
Who were the others? What deserts? Glassless windows? What the hell is he talking about?
But he continued reading. Several of the others came to join him, their curiosity overcoming their fear. They gazed wide-eyed into that alien landscape. Off in the distance, Depina thought he saw something move. He pointed, and the rest of them saw it too. By the time the rest had joined them, the object had grown larger as it stopped and started in quick, jerky movements.
What is that?
Carol said, not to anyone in particular. It continued these strange movements as it steadily grew closer. It was still too far away to tell what it was or what it was doing.
I wish I had a pair of binoculars,
someone said from the back. They watched, mesmerized by what they were seeing. Suddenly, a shadow appeared in their peripheral vision, about 100 yards away to their right. A few seconds later, the object that cast the shadow appeared. It looked like a cross between a spider and a starfish. It was about the size of a Volkswagen, and the sound it made was a low, rumbling moan. It was moving in the same manner as the thing they'd been watching for the last few minutes. It was running across the sand as if in pursuit of something. It would stop and then stand for a few seconds, turning its head much like a robin does when it's listening for a worm. Then it would start up again. After a minute or so of these exaggerated movements, it stopped and plunged its two protruding tusks deep into the sand. For the next few seconds, it didn't move at all. It just stood there, rigid as a statue. Then it raised its head, throwing sand everywhere. Impaled on the tusk was some kind of animal. It resembled a huge mole. It was still alive and squirming as the creature shook it violently. The mole was making a grunting sound as it tried to free itself. The grunts didn't last long, though, as the tusk suddenly separated, tearing it in half.
My God, did you see that?
Depina was looking at the same gruesome scene.
Yes, and from that moaning sound I think it might have been what we heard earlier.
The entire group was maneuvering, trying to get a better view. This caught the attention of the creature. It turned and faced them. It seemed to sense their presence more than actually seeing them. It started toward them, but without the jerky motion it had shown before. The group started to back up, eyes riveted on the thing in front of them. Then they turned and ran like hell, all but Depina. He just stood there, half in shock. By the time he finally turned to run, the creature had closed the gap between them to less than 50 yards. Its legs were throwing sand everywhere as it moved. It was fast for such a size. The others practically climbed over each other, getting through the maintenance room door, which they locked using a heavy steel bar that was wedged between two braces. Someone remarked,
Why would a door have this kind of lock on it? It's made to keep something out, not to protect something from being stolen.
Two of Singleton's men climbed the ladder leading into a hatch, only to find it was already occupied. It was confining with 4 men in such a small place, but they didn't really have much choice. Bill shut the hatch and shoved the bolt into the lock. They couldn't see into the beam tunnel with the door closed, but they could hear. When Depina finally got there, everything was locked down tight. He panicked. Looking around, there was nowhere to go. He tried to squeeze into a small opening behind one of the giant magnets, but there just wasn't enough space to hide his 170-pound frame. He could hear the sounds of the monster's feet as they echoed off the tunnel floor. Then he heard another sound, just as loud and just as clear. bells. He heard the sound of bells. But that was impossible. It must be the rush of adrenaline causing him to imagine things. He was terrified. His mind was racing. Suddenly, a voice popped into his head. It was as clear as if the speaker was standing right beside him. He glanced to both sides, expecting Bill or Singleton to be standing there. What the voice had said was immediately obvious. He was standing next to the leaking liquid nitrogen line. He pulled off his shirt and wrapped it around the hose. Then he turned the valve controlling the refrigerant's flow to the off position. Richardville had deliberately left the connector loose so it was easy to unscrew. When he turned around, the creature was standing between him and the outer wall. It was glaring at him through 4 compound eyes. His heart nearly stopped. In his worst nightmare, he couldn't imagine anything so ugly. It was waving its tusks in the air menacingly. They were pointed and serrated. Anything impaled on them wasn't getting off. He pointed the hose at the creature's head, but he waited to turn it on. The creature took a few steps toward him and stopped. It seemed to sense that something was wrong. It must have been thinking, what is this thing? Why is it just standing there? The people inside the maintenance room gathered around the 2 overhead monitors. Depina had uncovered the cameras earlier and they were working again. As they watched in horror, they realized that there was absolutely nothing they could do. The creature took its time approaching Depina. It had never seen anything like him before and it wasn't sure if he was even edible. As it neared him, it detected the heat from his body. This triggered its instinct to strike. Depina stood there, his left hand holding the hose, his right hand on the valve. He knew he only had one shot at this. It had to be timed just right. He didn't want to drive the monster back into the tunnel. He wanted to kill it. The creature sensed that it had the advantage and eased towards him, tusk ready to tear him to pieces. It was time. Depina turned the valve all the way to the left, and a plume of liquid nitrogen shot from the end of the hose, dousing the creature before it realized what had happened. Its eyes froze instantly as soon as the liquid hit them. It reared up on its 4 back legs, trying to clear the cold from its eyes with its front pair. It was trying to get away, but with its vision destroyed, it didn't know which way to turn. Tissues froze at the touch of the liquid nitrogen. The creature blindly lurched forward, trying to spear whatever was attacking it. Depina stepped out of the way, the short hose not allowing him much leeway, but it was enough. He was careful not to touch the creature's frozen flesh as it thrashed in agony. He sprayed the head, covering it with a layer of slush. This stopped any motion wherever it landed. In less than a minute, it was over. He shut the valve and the hose went limp. He'd let Richardville hook it back up to the magnet later. Right now, he just wanted to catch his breath. The door to the maintenance room flew open and everyone rushed out to see if he was all right. They couldn't believe he had actually killed this thing. They also realized how lucky he was to have been near the liquid nitrogen line. Had he been anywhere else, he'd be dead. The scene was surreal as the liquid nitrogen warmed and turned back into a gas. The bubbles caused the hair on the creature's body to move as though it were still alive.
That was sheer genius using the liquid nitrogen. How in the world did you think of it?
Carol asked.
I'd have been too scared to even move.
Depina stood there for a few seconds before answering.
I didn't think of it. I heard someone say,
Use the hose to kill it.
I'd have never thought of it myself. When I heard the voice, I just did it.
What do you mean? The voice?
That's exactly what it was. A voice. I swear, it was like someone was standing right beside me. I remember something else too. I heard bells.
You had to have imagined it. We were watching you the whole time and you were alone.
Someone was here, and they saved my life.
Depina looked back toward the other side of the beam tunnel. I just hope there aren't any more of those things down there. No one spoke. They had all heard those same moans before, but right now they needed to... General Russell looked up from the page, pondering what he'd been reading. The last sentence was never finished. One thing is for sure. He wasn't going to solve anything until he knew what had taken place at the beginning. With his cognac to keep him warm, he straightened the stack of papers and started to read. But from the beginning this time, he would still be reading when the sun came up. At this point, we're going to leave General Russell to his reading. We aren't limited to those sketchy pages that he has to work with. What follows is the complete story of Fermilab. The days before and after, the key was forged and the door was opened.